there is this thing called the lump of labor fallacy. And this is my hot take on it, which is people view so the lump of labor fallacy, the lump of labor study was done like 100 years ago during the Industrial Revolution. It was like our factories are these assembly lines, these industrial things going to take our jobs. Or
Mhm.
it also shows up in like if foreigners come into my country, are they going to steal my jobs? Turns out if you go to look at the research, none of that is true. It's just like hype, fear, like more oppressive ideas trying to like wash out real thinkers. What I really mean by that is it's not true. Here's the thing, bro. Humans procreate so fast that the population outpaces technology and jobs at such an exponential rate that there's always more work and everybody always has a job. And people who want to work, work. And people who don't, don't.
Hello, and welcome to the CX Files. Today's guest is Dennis Wakabayashi. He is the global voice of CX, which is also a community of CX professionals that he leads. He's published multiple works on CX and is currently wrapping up the last year of a 3-year world tour. He's interested in understanding the relationships between humans and the systems they use, for better or worse. He also runs a CX agency focusing on strategy for major brands and government. Dennis, thanks for joining.
Hi, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
So I always like to get a little bit into the background of my guests and try to understand sort of where you're coming from. Can you tell us a story about sort of how you got into CX and sort of maybe what surprised you or what caught you off guard in the early days?
I was a advertising and marketing executive for many years, and I was, every year they let you go to one conference or another, and I ended up going to a CX conference by Forrester. And so much of everything they were saying made a lot of sense, and it was all new and fresh at this time. This was many, many years ago. But I also understood at that time that the point of origin of their thinking was, in my estimation, potentially a little off center. And I think, like many pioneers, they put a stake in the ground and they opened up a whole new universe to a lot of executives like us. But at the same time, I think that there was a bias that sort of veered that ideology a little bit off course. Now, having said that, that's not a criticism, it's just an observation. Because what it did was it did create an opening for many of us to see what they were seeing and make our own opinions about what the trajectory really would be. And I share that with you because for the last year, I've spent a considerable amount of time of my efforts understanding what the true point of origin for an idea is and what does a migration pattern look like for an idea. And so understanding the start, the trajectory, the bias, the forces upon ideas is something that's crucial to me.
I love that. I think it's this idea I've been coming back to. It reminds me of this idea I've been coming back to of, you know, if you want to if you want to imagine the future and you want to move forward, it often pays very good dividends to study the history and where things came from. Is there something that you think was kind of set in motion in CX that is continuing now, and maybe there's some good and bad in that?
You know, from the first sales transaction in our existence, there was the customer experience. And it's been going on like that since then. I think what is there are transactions going everywhere, and more of those transactions even in terms of attention or belief or money. These transactions are happening at a faster pace just by sheer size of humanity. But the relationship between the systems that govern the transactions and the ideas, there is, for the first time in our existence, there has become a global ecosystem of people, ideas, process, functions, and more friction occurs in some places than others. And so I think this idea of good experiences versus friction, that's perpetual.
Yeah, I think there's this word friction, which I've heard in some recent conversations with other guests, and obviously the basic definition of the word is not a mystery to anybody, but but the ways that friction manifests itself in customer experience, I think it has a kind of, to me, it's kind of a confusing longevity of some in some cases. There's things that seems like we should have solved this friction by now, and other things that it's better than ever. So what are some examples of things that you think are kind of unsolved mysteries, if you will, or kind of things that you think would really be big unlocks if people could finally reduce that friction?
Yeah. So let's talk about the friction. People, to your point, we think we know what that word means, but we don't know how to act on it. And again, it's because people tend to look at things inverted. When I talk about friction, I'm talking about things like trust and belief. So if I start to not believe you or not trust you, that's the friction that's dangerous for the transaction. It's not your payment gateway or your API into your e-com server. It's what's happening around me that you're not sensitive to. There's the friction. And I'll give you the so I just got here last night from Las Vegas. And I'll tell you what the number one customer experience of all time is. By far, the most successful of all is the feeling that the world is conspiring with you and not against you. Some people may call that luck, but companies who can inject these luck as part of their experiences outperform a lot in terms of all the metrics. So you see Vegas, they introduced a lot of new innovations, but these innovations systematically decrease the payouts on the slot machines. They put in computers that we don't trust. When you had a dealer and a deck of cards, people would bet the farm. No one's betting the farm in Vegas anymore. The mechanics of it had become streamlined and so efficient, hence, one could say less friction, but in reality, removing luck from the equation has created so much friction in every single experience in Vegas that the entire economic structure of Vegas is in jeopardy.
That my mind is blown because it seems like it almost sounds like what you're saying is obvious, but when you think through it, it's so true, and yet people miss this all the time when they're building their teams, when they're setting up their systems, when they're building strategy for their business. It's it's the short-sightedness of what can be measured versus what actually matters. And what can be measured is important, but that's only part of what actually matters. Um, and
Let me
so,
get let me
yeah, go for it.
can I I'm right there with you, bro. So here's the thing. You can measure trust and belief now. That's what my systems have been doing for the last year, my agentic systems. But it doesn't matter if you can measure them or not. Here's some things that people miss. And this is where I think you're getting to it, the aha moment, which is who cares what electricity is running through what chip at what clock speed at which transaction gateway or which algorithm is doing this, that, or the other thing. None of that matters because all of it is in a system of decay. The obsolescence of technology and process is so paramount that it doesn't matter. And here's, I'll give you an example. Easiest example. Humans, we don't network through computers. We network through voice, sound, taste, touch, these things. And our ideas are not able to be captured systematically yet. And what I mean by that is fashion in one country will jump over the border into another country and supply chain can't keep up with it. So we as humans are still vastly interconnected deeper and more richly than any process or system that we could build to try to capture the nature of humanity. And that is why most customer experience programs face what is more of a commonplace term of friction, is because they think that they can act upon it with machines or physics.
That that is true. You know that there's a limitation of these things. There's an incompleteness. You know, it doesn't capture the whole human experience, right? We talk about the customer experience, but what about the human experience, right? Just the emotional, the psychological aspects, the social aspects, right? Um, and I think it takes a certain kind of leadership, a certain perspective to be able to be to be psychological and not be too logical. You know, being too logical will have you optimizing purely for efficiency or sort of focusing on the local optimum instead of the global optimum, which is really the best for, in the end, I think is the best for customers, for teams and for business as well. I want to shift gears a little bit. I want to ask you, so you're working on agentic systems yourself. I'm sure you're consulting on these kinds of systems with your clients, and having a lot of conversations around this. What are some support processes that you see as an overlooked opportunity with agentic AI or just AI in general?
Thinking is an overlooked process. Here's the thing. I don't trust any marketing person in the world to do good marketing anymore. And I give you and I'll tell you why I think that, which is I wouldn't trust a marketing person to market any more than I would trust um, my friend who's into comic books to tell me about how baseball really works. We as people can only focus our attention or our expertise on one or two, a limited number of ideas can fit in our head at any given time because we're under cognitive distress constantly by everything around us. And so there are no experts. And those who can use AI to realize truths that they themselves have hidden from or been denied become those who facilitate the future of business and behavior.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. I think, if you have a perspective, um, born out of some frustration, maybe some friction, some difficulty that you experienced, and then you could translate that with tools into a result, but it comes from your own experience, your own sense, that narrow piece which you're familiar with. I think a lot of people are frustrated, a lot of customers and consumers out there are frustrated with the experiences that they're getting, quote whatever study that you'd like on it, but I think it's pretty well understood that customers are by and large not satisfied, and there's some examples of on either side, but I think overall, we've had a lot of frustration, whether it's sitting on hold or the chat bot that puts you into an endless loop, and you're screaming, give me a human or whatever. Like, I know it's kind of a big ask, but like, what is the disconnect? Because even if you're a CX leader, like you've experienced the frustration yourself as a consumer in your own life, like, is it an organizational problem? Is it a communication problem? Is it just inertia of business? Like, where where is this disconnect, and why is customer experience just not operating at a higher level overall?
You ask great questions. I would say, Ben, it all depends on what you look at. So, this thing you just described about customer dissatisfaction is really this sense of betrayal. It's a misalignment of my beliefs, my expectations as a human. And the fact of the matter is, the companies that we do business with, we give our money to, or our time or attention to, are insignificant. They, the brands have egos, and the people inside the brands have egos that make them feel like they're significant. But the fact of the matter is, if you need water and you're thirsty, you'll go get it. And you're not going to be frustrated or have emotions about it. There's no frictional like diagnosis for operations of a business that solves that. People just they move like fish. It's like water. You're describing the concept of trying to grab the water, and you just can't. Like, that's not how experiences work. And I find this misconception stronger or less depending upon the cultures you're in, and I'll give you two examples there. One thing is the complete polarization of 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 knowledge or accuracy. And what I mean by that is, like, you and I, we're transacting in voice, sound. We're making sounds, and we're transacting. Because I go around the world, I can measure and clock the variations of the language, transactions of ideas in a geography. So, as an example, in the Middle East, a English idea travels at 5x. The Arabic ideas travel at over 60x in terms of relevance in that environment. Two humans speaking a language should be equal. So, but they're not. So you have these things that are misconceived everywhere in the world. And I'll give you another one, which is the United States is so far behind most other places in the world in terms of the harmony between their systems, their transactions, and their people, that it's bewildering to me as an American, just when I'm in the United States, how far behind every experience is, whether the toilets in every public place per capita in the US are like half as good as the rest of the world. But also, most other places in the world are touchless payments. Boop, you walk around, boop, boop, boop. Here we have like a lot of formality and process around that. So there's a lot of, but it all does come back from like a perspective of, where am I and what do people think here?
Yeah, I mean, the the international aspect, it brings a different lens, doesn't it? I have this personal belief that, and maybe this is not unique to me, but I have this belief that if you only have one culture in your personal background that you've been exposed to, let's say you're born in one culture, born and raised, and you live your whole life there, unless you're really actively traveling, really actively reading different perspectives, you're going to basically have one view on whatever is going on, whatever the topic of the day is. You're going to have your perspective that you're grounded in. And the opposite side of that is going to be a blind spot. And so if you have an opportunity, if the listeners, people out there have an opportunity to travel or read different perspectives, then you can start to kind of stack those different views of the thing, and you can see it more completely with less blind spots. Is there something that really stands out to you as being, something that was kind of interesting to learn or interesting to notice as you've traveled the world and thought about CX from all these different points of view?
I don't know. It's all interesting to me. I think bringing it back to this show, Ben, it's interesting. I learn a lot from just talking to you, hearing the questions that you ask and the window that you're trying to open up for your listeners to hear different perspectives. And in that way, you are contributing to the greater good. And despite what one might think, there are so few of you really in the world. And so, my biggest surprise is for you. The reason I came today is you're one of a very small group. It may feel like you're in a big ocean of people, but there just really aren't that many people, Ben, who take the time like you do to get up in the morning, get your camera on, create content, and be part of the belief systems and the awareness that brings harmony to the world. So I just, my surprise is there's not as many of you, Ben, as you probably think there are.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I wonder if there's maybe some other topics here that we could get into. We've talked about AI, of course. We've talked about the CX side of things, of course, the applications there. Let's see, what else can we explore? I mean, are there any things that you want to riff on? Are there any questions you want to ask me? Just open it up a little bit.
Yeah. Let's get down to the real questions, Ben. What do you think? What do you think's on the horizon in 2026? Do you have some hot takes? I mean, it's the beginning of the year and we're
Hmm.
going into it. And not what I don't want to know what you believe will happen or what you predict as much as what seeds are you planting? What crops are you growing?
Okay, great question. Yeah. So I mean, my background, I've moved around a lot. I've lived in all different parts of the US. I've lived in Japan. And one thing that has been consistent for me is sort of always being in the tech world. So my parents both worked in tech. I was actually born in Silicon Valley, although I left around middle school. And so, I've sort of always been in this tech world, digital native, if you will. But I feel like, there's been these big technological waves. There's been the internet, of course, there's smartphones, there's the cloud and SaaS business, all the social networks, all that stuff has happened in my lifetime. I mean, internet, I guess, technically started before I was born, but this AI wave is really another technological wave, and maybe the scope and scale of it is a little bit different, but there's a lot of patterns that I see are repeating here, right? The adoption curve, and I think that my sense is that we're still early, and it really feels like we're in the messy transition right now. A lot of people are experimenting, a lot of companies are piloting programs. You know, there's some people who are ahead of the curve, some people who are far behind, some companies who are kind of putting their head in the sand, or individuals as well. But I think this is really on the scale of like, the Industrial Revolution or the advent of electricity. And so AI is going to be in everything. It's going to become so ubiquitous that we don't even mention it. It's just assumed that it's always there. And so I'm thinking about, what does the world look like in 2026 and beyond, to get to your question. It's always on, it's always available, and what is what is enduring in that, right? Like what endured through electricity being deployed? What endured through the internet, right? Uh, humans are fundamentally very adaptable, and people have relationships with other people. We might have an AI companion or something, but that's never going to fully satisfy us. And neither is an AI agent for support, right? There's always going to be an aspect of humanity that's in there that we seek as humans. And I think if anything, the value of those human connections is going to go up as a contrast. If you have this huge volume and huge frequency of sort of AI interaction happening, then just naturally by contrast, the human interaction is going to become more valuable.
That is true. Um, in some dialects, the, the what you're describing is sort of like matter. It really cannot be created or destroyed. The- to to remove humans from the equation is sort of an obvious, like, not going to happen. But I think what's interesting about what you're saying is, in the future, when you ask what will endure, people are not going to like to hear this, and I'm I I just will say this because I think it's true. AI will become the new religion. So, we used to believe in whatever. Many places were polytheistic, and then there was monotheism, and maybe there's like this version of AIism. But AI will become a way that people come to understand truth consistently across a greater number of people with less friction, lack of belief, loss of trust, feeling of betrayal, misunderstandings. Those things will decrease because of AI, and the human quotient, the human spirit will become liberated by that. And I believe that, not speaking to anyone's ultimate beliefs, but as a if religion was a way to organize people around human truths, then AI will certainly play a larger role in that than a book.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm reminded of phrases I've heard over the years on the internet, on social media of like, people saying, content creators saying, "Oh, I was blessed by the algorithm." I've heard people say things like that.
That, by the way, is the feeling of the universe conspiring with you, and
Right,
they propagate that.
right. And what is, extend the metaphor, what is the prayer, right? Is it like saying, please like and subscribe? That's like please help me out with the algorithm.
That's right.
Pray for me.
Yeah.
And then there's going to be, I'm sure, the AI equivalent, right?
And and
One
and
of the,
fi- and
yeah,
and can I just say, and then fast forward, within within the next 25 to 50 years, there will be an existential question of, did we create AI? Or that 4 generations from now, they'll say, well, or did AI influence us? Like, did AI
right.
shape us, or did we shape AI?
hmm Well, it's certainly going to be a two-way street, I think. And it is already. I mean, I was just having this conversation with the CEO, my CEO yesterday, about, you have in sci-fi, you have the like the Matrix and various, sci-fi universes. There's like the jack in the base of your skull, and like the plug that plugs in, and then you're like, you're connected, right? And it, you know, we were saying like at some point, you're going to have this, surgery or whatever, and then there's going to be like a, this kind of step change. There's going to be like a night and day difference. You're going to be either, not plugged in, or you're going to be plugged in, right? And I think that actually we're already plugged in. and it started well before, the internet. It started with writing. We started to externalize our brain, and even
You
language
get it,
itself
Ben.
itself,
You
right?
you
And
get
so
it.
so it's not, I don't see it as being like a major, oh, it's like, 0 to 1. It's a curve that we're on and we've been on for a long time. Now, certainly that curve is accelerating, and maybe it's starting to kind of turn the corner and starting to go vertical a little bit. But
Is it, or is
you
it
know,
just harmonizing? I mean, I'm not sure there's an acceleration there. People talk about that a lot. I don't believe that. That you're talking about, I think, economics there, and economics rise and fall all over the world for various ideas. And anybody who wants to talk about catching a wave or blah, 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 it's all a bunch of bullshit. The truth is, wherever you are, the dynamics around you, there's a resonance that you need to find harmony with, or you move to where the harmony is. So but you are right that everyone's perspective in that way is valid. If you're looking at the wave and it's going up and somebody else is looking at it going down, both are right. But what I wanted to say is the interface. People talk about these tubes, because I watch a lot of sci-fi, plugging into your body. The internet literally shoots light from a device into our eyes. We absorb it at the speed of light through our eyes, where we have, it's not wireless. Like there's no wires going into our bodies. We are a wireless network, and it already interacts and injects itself, and we transact with it at light speed through our eyes. It's a visual. If you think of wireless as a network, eyesight is the strongest network on the planet right now.
yeah, I think of like, there's this kind of external brain, and and you're mentioning this idea of sort of affinity, I think is one way to say it, right? And where are the affinities that we have? And we feel, certainly emotion, I think, before logic. And so, if you have, for example, business A, which focuses maybe a little bit more on CX, it invests a little bit more into, visual design. It invests a little bit more into branding. It invests more into these things that are sort of emotional and not so much on, the logical or the metrics or the pure efficiency numbers or whatever. I think long term that value is going to go up and it's going to become more of a differentiator. What do you think about that idea of sort of like, you know, the the ROI on emotion, if you will?
I think that there is, but I think it moves like the weather.
Mm,
I think that every customer experience can be summed up by that one song you listened to that one summer where you had it on repeat and you loved it. And then at some point you hated it and you
mm,
didn't listen to it. And then many, many years later, you listen to it again. You're like, oh, that's my jam. And that's basically customer experience. Be like, oh, I used to go there every Saturday for brunch, but I haven't been there in 10 years. Well, what happened? Did you change the brunch? Did you stop being in that location? Like none of that mattered. It was like the person was into you for a while and then they stopped and they went somewhere else. It's not that confusing.
that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I think people definitely seek novelty, and novelty wears off. One thing I wanted to get your thoughts on. This is kind of like something that is a bit of a pet peeve for me, but I want to know what you think. I've seen this pattern of, some businesses. So let's say, ABC company has, an AI agent, for customer support, and you come and it has a little chat widget or whatever, and it says, hi, I'm Sarah, an AI agent from ABC company. What do you think about this? Like, it has like a little profile picture, it has like a human name. What do you think about this pattern versus, more of a generic, like, I'm an AI assistant, not human?
I mean, then I'll put it to a different way. Because I hear a lot of this, like, stuff about AI agents. And these are the same people who don't even know how to get around in their own towns without Google Maps. And so, they have this opinion about voice as an interaction, right?
Mm.
They have a different opinion about watching like letters on a screen text. And they have an entirely different opinion of looking at an arrow and following it blindly. Like I mean, I can't tell you what I think about that because um it's ridiculous.
All right. Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, personally, I just wish it would be more clearly, a human or, just an arrow pointing and telling me where to go. It's obviously not a human. I'd like there to be a clear dividing line, I guess.
You know what? AI had the most impact on the agents by increasing the aptitude of the humans, not by deflecting them. Like, if you want to put up a moat of technology to blockade your business from people who genuinely are interested in connecting with you, that's on you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think, it's ultimately short-sighted, and this might be going back to the previous one of the previous topics of sort of, you know, honing in too much on efficiency, and losing sight of the big picture. Absolutely agree with you. I think, on that note, one more question here before we kind of wrap up the episode. What do you see as the evolution of support roles, from junior on up? Because there's so much anxiety now about people being replaced, people being, automated out of a job. And I have my own thoughts on it, but, do you see a path forward, for an evolution, for maybe retraining from a tier one support associate into, somebody who is more valuable to the organization by what they can add instead of, the costs that can be saved by eliminating them.
I would say that there is this thing called the lump of labor fallacy. And this is my hot take on it, which is people view so the lump of labor fallacy, the lump of labor study was done like 100 years ago during the Industrial Revolution. It was like our factories are these assembly lines, these industrial things going to take our jobs. Or
Hmm.
it also shows up in like if foreigners come into my country, are they going to steal my jobs?
Hmm.
And it turns out if you go to look at the research, none of that is true. It's just like hype, fear, like more oppressive ideas trying to like wash out real thinkers. What I really mean by that is it's not true. Here's the thing, bro. Humans procreate so fast that the population outpaces technology and jobs at such an exponential rate that there's always more work and everybody always has a job. And people who want to work, work, and people who don't, don't. And it's other systems like welfare or other kinds of systems that are incentives not to work maybe. What are the incentives for us to learn more or do more or contribute in a greater way? And that's not a condition of a building a business.
Well said. I think that is a difficult reality, but a positive direction. I think, a positive, how can I say this? The reality may be very difficult for many people. It is difficult for many people, the reality of, finding a job and finding work. But I think ultimately, you know, you're right that if you want to work, you'll find something to do, and there's always more to do. I
You
guess
know,
I'm trying to get at
Ben,
this like this idea of like transitioning in the AI era too, right? Like get out of the old model, whether you're a leader or you're a junior or you know a COO or whatever it is. It's like get out of the old model and move into, know, get out of the cost center framing, get into this value framing of like what's possible now, right? If you're a junior looking at your career opportunities, it's like what can I do now that I couldn't do before, not, what is being taken away from me.
Well, I'll tell you a couple things there. Back to on the lump of labor fallacy. People hype up the conversation about AI, particularly because they view AI as a technological threat, but also they view AI as an immigrant. So you get this like heightened
Mm,
thing. If you're talking
well said.
about what should people do to adapt to the new normal, maybe nothing. Maybe it all just happens the way it's supposed to. If you and I were sitting here on our stone tablets, you know, way back in the day, tapping out our stories, we'd be talking about like floods, or we'd be talking about meteors. I don't know, but the story just goes on. 100 years
Hmm.
from now, this whole conversation will be irrelevant, like we will be. And I think that what I see around the world in is where I think the attention should be, instead of where we're talking, is I find it fascinating that everywhere I go in the world, there is the economy and then there's the shadow economy. And I'll give you an example there. Jobs. I'm in South Africa. They're talking about 50% unemployment rate, right? And I spent a lot of time in South Africa, in the poorest, the richest, the classiest, the most unclassiest, whatever range of spectrum. Because I went to some of the most dangerous cities there just with my video camera to scope it out. And here's what I found: I didn't find a single person who wasn't working. Every single person was working. They were making money on a daily basis. And so, like, this one gentleman, he would go along the roads and find like wood pallets that had fallen off trucks, and he would turn it into furniture, and this stuff was gorgeous, and he would sell it. He was working all day long every day, but if you ask somebody else, they would say he doesn't have a job. So I think that where we're going to see more adjustment is where the let's say sanctioned economies and the shadow economies, and the one that uses AI the most will become the new normal. and and that's like 100 years from now or whatever.
Well, I think that there's such an interesting perspective that you bring, and I I think we've touched on some pretty heavy topics today. We've covered everything from, politics and immigration to religion and so on. But I'm left with a feeling of optimism and new
It all
kind of
works
faith.
out.
I'm
It
left
all
with a
works out.
renewed, yeah, I mean, I have a renewed faith in the kind of the human ability to overcome as well, despite whatever technological or other trends we're faced with. So, everybody out there, it all does work out, and I hope
What I would
we can
what I would
explore these new opportunities, and make it
Ben,
better.
on that note, I just want to say thank you for saying that. Here's the thing: fear doesn't have to be part of the equation. That is, danger and fear are different. And in our conversations, none of us should be afraid of the future. It happens, it comes to us. We don't have to be afraid of it. It's inevitable.
Well said. On that note, this has been the CX Files podcast with Dennis Wakabayashi. You can find him on LinkedIn. Check out the Global Voice of CX, um, and for more resources. And we'll see you next time on the CX Files.